Hello and welcome to Framing the Foundation podcast. I'm your host, Sid Parulkar, and I'm here again with an exciting episode. Today, we get a chance to speak to Scott Schliebner. He is a strategic, innovative, and a commercially oriented drug development executive with over 30 years of experience. Scott is currently the VP and Global Head of Drug Development Consulting at Novotech. He's been in the industry for over 30 years. He is very passionate about uh, patient-focused research, infusing innovation in drug development. He serves as a board member. He's a strategic advisor, clinical executive, patient advocate, and a mentor. So he plays multiple hats in the industry. I'm pretty sure your listeners will learn a lot more about leadership, vision, strategy, what kind of mindset is required to really grow in the industry, as well as we'll touch points on his recent visits at ASCO and what's happening at Bio. I think there's a lot of optimism, but we'd love to hear his thoughts on this. So look forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for joining Framing the Foundation podcast. I know we have tried to reschedule this and reschedule this multiple times, so appreciate your flexibility. But as I mentioned in the intro, tons of experience now in the industry. I love the way you reach out and reach out to people for guidance, and at the same time are always available to speak about certain areas where you feel are very dear to your heart. So thank you again. We will dive into that, but love to hear about the recent interactions at ASCO and Bio. Both of them came very close to each other, so I'm pretty sure it's going to be a hectic week, or had been a hectic week, and now rolling into a brand new week coming up next week. So, but I'd love to hear how did that go?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on too. It's my pleasure to be here and join you. I love what you're focused on in terms of communicating, the foundation and a little bit around kind of career trajectory and maybe a little bit of maybe even paying it forward in a way, even if that phrase isn't being used. I think that's important. So it's for anybody, I guess, tuning in, we're recording this on a Friday morning, my time, West Coast. Friday early afternoon, your time in Boston. And I got back in last night from Bio, which was in San Diego this year, and was preceded by going to the ASCO conference, American Society of Clinical Oncology, which is held these days in Chicago every year, first weekend of June. So it was ASCO Friday to Monday, and then I flew to San Diego on Monday, and then we had Bio for several days. And so it was fast and furious with a capital F, and it was busy, but it was also energizing and it was optimistic, right? So the ASCO conference being obviously therapeutically focused and focused on oncology and hematology was great. That event is enormous. It's more than 40,000 attendees. People have talked for years about should this be broken into a couple different events, but I mean, by and large, it's such an annual sort of bringing together of anybody who works in that space. It's also an annual landmark time to share new results and new promising advances and data. And with, I don't know the exact numbers, depending on, I guess, if you're talking about biotech or pharma or which sort of subset, but oncology is 50%, maybe more than 50% of all clinical R&D spend. So ASCO, I think, is like the canary in the coal mine in terms of a symbol and a indicator and a little bit of a marker of kind of how the industry is doing and where it's heading and things like that. So it was amazing to be there. My company, Novotech, we engaged with a lot of current and prospective clients. We also connected with a lot of investigators and some site networks and things like that. A lot of talks around executing studies globally and how to, bring these to the right types of patients and ensure access. And also at ASCO, I think you had a lot of good indicators of optimism around where we're headed. And I think it's fair to say that the drug development space has been a little challenging, right? We've been a little bit of a downward slump. Right? Fundraising and, limited markets. We have some geopolitical things, of course, that are going on in a few pockets around the world. We have probably an eventful election here in the United States later in the fall.
Right.
And I think everyone's ready for us to kind of emerge out of this little slumber, little dip that we've been in. So a lot of optimism around coming out of that. We heard some real good predictions around, like, at the first of the year in 2025, there was predictions that maybe the market would kind of take off and that you'd see even investors wanting to get in kind of early on that,
Mhm.
maybe in the September, October timeframe. So I don't know
Is
whose
that still the
crystal
case?
ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to predict, right? I don't know if these crystal balls are perfect necessarily, but it feels like there's optimism and there's things loosening up and there's incredible scientific and medical advances. So future looks really bright, I think, coming out of ASCO. And it was
It's good
really
to hear that.
exciting.
No, absolutely. I've been speaking to so many people, and ASCO happens to be a great conference to be part of. It's, as you said, it's a benchmark for the industry, and your presence at ASCO says a lot about your company. Like, it puts your company on a global map as well. So I think it's good for somebody to be there and represent their company. But going back to your question about current markets, I'm really hoping that this turns around because we've seen a lot more talent pool than the number of jobs with the layoff that have happened right now. And I'm speaking to so many people who have tons of experience but are still struggling to find something to make it. So I'm really being optimistic, really hoping that that turns around. Similarly, I don't know how was the experience at Bio. I mean, do you see a lot of optimism because it's a conglomeration of investors, people with
Yep.
different early stage biotech companies looking for funding, innovators. How was that experience?
Yeah, that was also equally great. Certainly like a different subset of the industry, right? Not therapeutically focused, but also very global, right? So within the bio annual convention, we use the phrase Epcot Center because you have, as you go around the exhibit halls, you have the Australian section and the Korean
Right.
section, and then even in the U.S., each state had, we had Massachusetts, we had Washington, Oregon, New Jersey. We even had individual cities like San Francisco sort of marketing themselves, and so you could kind of take a tour of the world. That was pretty interesting. And yeah, but really energetic. The new president of Bio, John Crowley, formerly of Amicus, and this decorated war hero is like brought some new, really invigorated leadership to the organization, which is fantastic. Lots of global discussions, a lot of discussions around funding. An organization like myself, Novotech, we began as an Australian organization that kind of grew in Asia Pac, and we're an Asia Pacific group for so long. But we've expanded through organically and inorganically through some acquisitions to be able to stay with our clients really
Right.
wherever drug development goes, right? So that's a healthy normal study in Australia, kind of being able to move to the US for a phase 2 and be able to cover US and Europe and Asia Pac for bigger studies. So I just mentioned that because my organization's personal growth has really kind of mirrored, I think, where biotech drug development is going. We're just trying to be kind of responsive to clients. So being there and being also there with an international team. I mean, I had colleagues from Australia, Korea, China, the UK, certainly the US. Am I forgetting any countries I left out? It was really nice to have a global team and be able
Mm-hmm.
to meet with people from really around the globe. And you get a lot of different perspectives on drug development. You got a lot of perspectives on cultural differences and the way people sort of
Yeah.
work and expectations. So it was great. It was really, I just love getting out of my comfort zone a little bit and learning as much as I can.
That's great because I worked
So
5 years in Asia Pac, traveled pretty much quite a bit extensively in Asia Pac before moving to the US. So I was exposed to that culture very early in my career. So totally agree. I think different cultures, even the investigators, like how you treat them has to be different. So it's
right?
it's a whole different ballgame. But I'm glad,
Yeah,
thank you again for sharing your experience from bio. God, again,
of course.
as you're aware, this podcast is more focused on trying to provide some foundational, I would say, elements to the next generation. So, which is why I always dive into individuals' journey because I think it's important for people to understand like how, where, how, what challenges. So, would love to hear about how your journey has been. I know it's never a smooth ride, so would love to hear how you evolved in your career.
Sure. Well, I just applaud you also for just, framing the foundation, like thinking about that, because for for people who are in clinical drug development, clinical research, there's not really one clear pathway you take, right? I mean, there are some industries that you have a very specific kind of journey you take, an
Right.
evolution and
Perfect.
maybe hierarchical steps, right? And there's not a lot of specific clinical research training programs in college or necessarily a specific degree you need to have. You could come at this from bench science or from something more applied, or you could be in sales in another industry and transit. So there's so many different ways. I mean, for me, as you can see from like gray hair, I've been in this industry for 30 years now. I love our space, and I don't know. My journey's probably been a little bit of a zigzaggy line as well. I think I was, early days in undergrad and graduate school. I was always very drawn to research. I was naturally a little analytical. I found myself working in my initial work was in like cognitive psychology lab. I loved neuroscience. I loved the research aspect of it, but pretty quickly there, I was really fortunate too. I kind of came out of undergraduate with a lot of publications already, and I was very
Wow.
fortunate to partner with
Yeah.
some mentors that took me under their wing and helped give me some opportunities. And
To have mentors around you who can provide you the guidance. I
yeah, we
mean,
don't
you
do it
need a
alone. I
mentor.
mean, you don't do it
Yeah.
alone. You gotta have some help. There are ups and downs. You need maybe it's even more important to have guidance when you are on like a little bit of a down cycle. Keep perspective. Know that there's future pathways there, but having someone to help guide you. I mean, for example, one of the so not only did I get some great research exposure and a couple publications, but I remember very early on I was planning to do a PhD in cognitive neuroscience was kind of my plan,
Mm.
and I was looking at academic programs, and I had early advisors and mentors and professors that said, before you do that, you might want to, instead of jumping in and doing a PhD, you may want to go do a master's degree in something a little more practical so that you have some skills that come out of that, right?
Yeah.
And I thought it was strange advice at the time from these PhD academic professors. Um, in retrospect, they either maybe weren't as thrilled with their own academic careers, or they may have seen something in me that said, I don't know if that guy is really the best fit for, PhD academics. I'm not sure. Either way, though, I think they were right. They kind of guided me to go to a master's degree and then said, well, if you do that program, get some skills, you could work for a few years, or if you
Mhm.
still want to pursue that PhD, you'll be even better prepared to take that next step. Um, so I did. And on that journey, I realized that while I loved research, getting really into the details of more like basic and like less applied research, I
Mhm.
was finding it certainly wasn't the best fit for me. I remember in graduate school having to write a federal research grant and having to write a justification for the research, and why was this research so important? Why do we need funding? And I remember writing or typing, and I had a hard time really like selling myself on why this
Mhm.
was so critical. And I thought, if I don't think it's super critical, how can I convince a funding agency? And that was a
True.
little bit of a
Yeah.
turning point for me, kind of realizing I like research, but I think I need to do something that's applied, that impacts people, that you could maybe see the effects of a little more. And so that was part of a
Right.
little bit of a shift that kind of led me towards clinical research and clinical drug development a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating how like every step in your life preps you for the next steps in your life. That's the way to look at it because I have something similar. As you know, I did my master's in pharmaceutical biotechnology, and once I finished that, I did not want to get into a lab to do a PhD, and I'd done some I'd done some marketing and sales before I did my master's. In between my master's and bachelor's, um, and then clinical research just happened. So I was like, perfect fit, like just get in. Get it. So as I said, there's no single way of getting into clinical research. Everybody has their own journey. But yeah, Scott, going back to yours, like, what was that? Was that pivotal point in your career where, or in your life where you felt like, okay, clinical research might be a path?
Yeah, I guess there were a couple parts of it. There was definitely an element of, okay, this initial path I'm on, I don't think is going to I don't think it's the best fit for me long term. And then, so the next question was, well, geez, what am I going to do now? And I ended up kind of in that same realm, kind of switched, like mentally, I kind of knew I wanted to do something slightly different. I kind of switched a little bit of programs as well and ended up doing a degree in like epidemiology and biostatistics and got a little more exposed to some public health. And I took a pharmacoepidemiology class, which is a really long word, but essentially kind of highlighted and sort of shown a spotlight on this little area that I didn't really.
Did I?
Yeah, can you hear me? I think we froze there for a second.
Yeah, yeah. I can hear it now.
Okay. I'll just rewind a second. So yeah, I came across this pharmacoepidemiology class, which was eye-opening and sort of spotlighted a little bit of the industry in a way that I didn't really know existed. And the subject matter of the class was great. The professor was an adjunct professor who taught that class, but he also had started his own small little niche CRO at the time. And I loved the class, and I was like, wow, there's this whole world here that's really, really interesting. So I literally, I loved the class, and I liked him, and I literally got a CV ready, and I made an appointment with him, and I went down to his offices one day, and I said, I think you should hire me as a project manager. And we spoke for a while, and he did. He offered me a job on the spot, and
That,
that was a little bit of a first. Wasn't my very first step, but it was kind of my first sort of real industry job. They were focused on moving drugs from prescription to over the counter status.
uh-huh.
How do you show that they're safe and people can self-diagnose and use? So it wasn't the most scientific. It wasn't the most complex space, but I guess that would be something I would mention to anyone earlier in their career is, even if it's not necessarily your dream area or perhaps your dream job. I wanted to do more complicated stuff in oncology and radio labeled antibodies, but it was a good step to like get exposed to working. We worked with some big pharma clients. I got to manage some big projects. I got to see a little bit of data and clinical monitoring and a little bit of, we developed lab kits. We did a little bit of everything, and you wore a lot of hats. And so
Mhm.
even if it wasn't my long-term dream role, it was a nice entry point. And I think anything that you can do to get exposed, learn, get some experience, because you don't necessarily know what's going to really stick and what's going to
That's
really
true.
be the area you want to focus on. So ideally, if you can do something a role that has a lot of different things you touch, it's kind of like taking classes in college. You take a lot of classes and you see maybe what you like the best and you major in that. I think clinical research, you can do a little bit of that where you can dabble in some areas
Mm.
and kind of find something hopefully that's a good fit for you.
That's very well said. I actually 2 weeks ago I was speaking to somebody and I was helping her get placed at one of our clients. And it was this individual from a site level. She was getting an opportunity to enter into the biotech industry, but just because
Yeah.
the pay was very low, she declined the offer. I mean, sometimes you have to like take a step back. Getting in is the difficult part. Once you get in, then it's easy to move around. That's the way I look at it. So I felt bad for her. I tried to convince her a lot because I have been through that situation where you're trying to move from one sector of the industry to the other, and that can be challenging. And when you get the opportunity, you should just grab onto it. Uh, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to derail the conversation, but it just
Oh,
reminded me of my conversations with her, and which is what I feel that every individual should think about. If they get an opportunity, if it's they have to let go of certain things, they should, and just grab onto it, learn, and then grow.
it's a great point, right? Because I think you don't want to undersell yourself or sell yourself short or not be recognized for the value you can bring. Like in that case, maybe that person felt like they were going to be undercompensated, but
Yeah.
you got to weigh that out with your own goals, right? Does this help me move forward some way? Does this is a year or two of learning something new that's a little bit of an investment in yourself?
Absolutely. Scott, and the reason I kept pursuing her because I could see her move into a project management role very quickly, and
Hmm.
but yeah, you can't change people's mind. You can just provide them with guidance and direction. That's the way I look at it. But
It's
Scott, just going back
yeah.
to your journey. Sorry. Good.
Well, no, I don't. I had a recent example with a colleague that kind of really ambitious, was in a role, wanted to do a lot of different things, wanted to learn and get exposed to U.S. regulations and gene and cell therapy, and had a whole list of kind of professional goals. And I'd asked him, like, what do you want to do when which is the direction you want to go in? Because I always try to ideally kind of align like goals or job functions ideally along with what someone really wants to do, right? If we can
Yeah.
tailor a role towards someone's interests, I think it's just better and it works for everyone. um, can't always do that perfectly, but I wanted to understand this individual's like goals and motivations so that I could find opportunities that were like a good fit for him. And he's a little younger and maybe wanted to do a lot of different things and was feeling maybe a little impatient. And he ended up switching roles within the organization to go do something that he thought maybe short term was a better fit, but it really doesn't get him anywhere near where he wants to go, right? And I was trying to guide a little bit, and he went and made his own choice. And to your point, like, I mean, I hope it works out. I think it was a little short-sighted in a way, right? I was like, I think
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
create the role that's gonna like help you get the things you want. Um, but I think, I don't know. I think patience and perspective comes with time, and we don't always have that.
No, I agree. And one of my ex bosses told me this: like when you enter into a company, the first year is when you figure out the company. The second year is when the company figure out what you are doing. So that's the second year when they will start planning for you once you have produced results and
Right.
you've proved yourself to be an asset. So leaving companies in less than a year or two is not the great recipe. Like unless like you really get an opportunity which you cannot like decline
Right.
for whatever reasons, like position or money or whatever. But you like take your time with an organization because you'll really know in 2 years where you stand with it. Or they might find you the right fit and might give you an opportunity that might be a dream opportunity.
Yeah, that's I was with an organization about a couple of years ago, and of course, there's been a lot of dynamics in this space, right? I mean, historically, you would never move on from a job less than a year. You always had to stay at least a year, even if it was a real terrible fit and you didn't like it. Coming out of, sort of COVID and coming out of COVID, we had a lot of things like the the great
Yes.
resignation, the great
Right.
reevaluation, people taking career breaks regularly, talking a little bit more about mental health and trying to choose like sort of a good quality of life. There was a time I remember at my older firm where the far majority of like new job applications we received were from people who had been at their current employers for less than 6 months.
Hmm.
And they were looking already. Hadn't been laid off. They were employed. They weren't feeling the vibe or weren't really super fulfilled or were
Yeah.
questioning the decision already, right? And I remember thinking, well, we're in a very unique spot. And I had some personal experiences related to that too. But back in the day, you would never consider that. You would just, I've
Yeah.
got to be here for a year or two at least, even if I know early on this isn't my long term fit. It feels like that shifted at some point. I'd love to hear your experience because I was shocked by the number of people that were ready to move. And it was almost I don't know if it was giving up necessarily, but not having that patience and perspective. Like you said, the first year to kind of learn the company, second year they learn you, and you go forward from there. People kind of ready to pull the plug after 6 months or something. I don't know. Have you
Yeah.
seen like you feel like that's different now than it used to be?
It's certainly different now, and the reason being, and this is something probably you can relate as well. Like COVID, post COVID, there was like one I would say individual and five jobs, and now as we have hit this whole biotech recession with a lot of layoffs, it's more about like five people for one job, and which
Yes.
is why I think people are sticking on and holding on to whatever they have, like irrespective of they might be miserable after joining a company, but they don't want to leave the company. It's all security at this point. There's so much talent pool at this point available that even tech companies have become very picky and choosy. I was talking to a very close friend of mine, senior director, very experienced, but he's struggling to find a director role. And you start reevaluating yourself, and you're like, "Am I that bad? I mean, what's happening there?" But it's just more choices that people have. Back in the day, they did not. So people were like, "Okay, I can leave this job, take like 3 months off, and then come back and find a job in 15 days." And that has completely changed, Scott. So I look at it
Agreed.
as like market correction, where I feel that the
Mm-hmm.
true talented people will kind of survive this phase, whereas people who just wanted to like get into the industry, just earn a buck, will fade off and move
Yeah.
on to other different careers. Uh, so it's positive and negative. That's the way I look at it. I don't know what you feel about it.
Well, I feel like it's very cyclical, and I don't mean to sound like the guy who's been around for a while, but I think when you've seen these cycles, these ups and downs, you realize where we are. We're going to come out of it, right? Whether it's like I said in the fall or early next year, or whoever's crystal ball has like the right sort of clarity to it. But you know, things are not always the same for where we are personally, right? You may be in a situation where you have younger children at home and you need a certain sort of work life balance. And then at another
Right.
time, you may find you need a different kind of work life balance. And, that's not always the same. And you pointed out these market conditions are really interesting. I mean, a couple years, I was with PRA Health Sciences for a decade, and we were acquired by Icon, and we got really
Right.
big. Um, when that big biotech engine and drug development was really going in all cylinders a few years ago, I remember I think we had something like 2,500 job openings, you
Yeah.
know, and could not hire. There was no way we could hire fast enough. It was going to
Yeah.
take us forever to catch up, and you're just like, how does this happen? And then to your point, you have a swing where we've had layoffs. We have a lot of very talented people out there looking for roles. It's shifted. It's a little like, I don't mean to minimize any kind of personal experiences, but it's almost a little bit like the housing market goes up and down, right? Like if
Yeah.
you're looking to buy a house, there's crazy times where it's a seller's market and you have to bid and waive your inspection rights and things. And then there's
That's
other
true.
times where you're trying to sell your house and there's a lot of inventory out there or something, and so you have to kind of be aware of kind of where you are in the cycle, and also know that like this cycle it'll evolve and you won't
Well,
stay where you are forever. You'll come out of it.
So that's a great point. And I'm pretty sure you must have seen quite a bit of these cycles, in your 30 years in the industry, Scott. But we're just about like close to 30 minutes, which is great. Like great conversation. It just flew, time just flew away. But I want to like touch base on some of the challenges, that you have come across, like major challenges in your career, like which you had, and how did you like come out of them? I think it would be good for listeners to really understand that perspective.
Major challenges. Well, there's certainly been some. I mean, I remember being in an early role in ClinOps for a biotech oncology company, and our CEO was a really dynamic guy, but was also new to clinical research. He was kind of like it came from another sort of area of the industry,
I've been
and
there.
right, like they became really successful and publicly traded and acquired and blah blah blah. But I remember early days, and I think I was like director of clinical operations or something, and we got to a point where he was like, "Well, you're not a physician, so I don't really know. I don't know what else you could do here, really." He very
Yeah.
much viewed as if I didn't have a medical degree, there was a pretty hard stop on like where my career could evolve. And I built a big team and was leading a team, and I felt like I had plateaued and was wanted to kind of take on a little more or expand. And again, this is quite a while ago. Maybe I didn't articulate that as well as I could have, or maybe I didn't ask for what I needed as much, or I didn't necessarily have the most supportive person I worked for at the time. They were a little more concerned, I think, about their own position and things. But I ended up moving on from the organization, and I don't really regret that at all. But I remember coming to a little bit of an impasse of saying,
Mhm.
decided to not go down that PhD or medical degree route a while back. Kind of really like this space and this work. Have I run into a hard stop of where I can go because of my educational degree? And that was kind of hard to run into. So I did a little bit of switching gears a little bit, and I ended up in a role where I would sort of be providing a little bit of like therapeutic expertise, even though I wasn't a physician.
Right.
And I thought to myself, okay, well, I'll just work a little harder. I'll just figure it out. I will, if I've got to sort of work side by side with a physician in a role. No, I don't have all the same medical scientific background, but I was like, I bet I can figure this out. I kind of adopted a little bit of a scrappy attitude of I'll outwork the next person, and I'll just study harder, and I'll just learn more. And there was a path I was on there for a few years doing that. It was certainly hard, but I grew a ton, and it was a little bit of a unintentional investment in myself where I became a little bit of a therapeutic expert in a space where all of my peers were physicians, and there wasn't really a clear path for it, but I guess I kind of wanted it a lot, and so I really went after it.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate so much to it because there came a time in my career as well where I regretted. I'm like, should I have gone for a PhD? Because I think
Mhm.
at certain point you hit this roadblock, as you said. What's next? Like,
Yeah,
and you can't go to the next level because you don't have an MD or a PhD. and as I said, you have to evolve. Like, that's exactly one of the things I did as well. Like, work exactly with the physician, a chief medical officer. She was gracious enough to take me under the wing and make me sit in the strategy meetings where I could learn more. And then you go back and you read more about the disease state, find out how things are done. What is it, what are the different lines of treatments out there? What was the first line of treatment? Why is it given? What are kind of adverse events that you see? I mean, it's about, as I said, self-learning, pushing yourself to find avenues to be able to find
yeah,
a solution. You're never going to be an MD, but if you can talk the same language, I think there's a little bit of respect that comes in from, especially working with chief medical officers and physicians who
totally
then
right.
offer you much more, I would say, credibility on what you're talking, right? They take you whatever you suggest with more credibility than what they would do otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important too. I mean, if someone was listening to this and they were saying, well, but yeah, you need an MD and it just really limits you, I would argue for example, so it's not all, we're not all looking for like this one singular role or there's one level of expertise, right? So
Right.
I'm not going to be an oncologist ever. Um, but there are other aspects of the space we're in and the work we're doing that aren't purely medical and scientific, right? There's
Yeah,
a lot of operational pieces that have to do with
absolutely. Yeah.
hands-on clinical operations that a lot of our physicians don't have experience with. There's a lot of parts of what we're doing that involve technology or data. Um, if we had a group of physicians around us right now, I'm sure they would agree with me and say they may not be the most technologically savvy at times. They've been focused on maybe
Yeah.
clinical or science or medicine. There's also aspects of roles that can have a little bit of maybe business acumen required for that, right? Maybe it's
Sure.
a little bit of a hybrid operational business role, and our physicians are focused over here. Not to say, of course, that you can't be a physician and no data or no tech or no business at all, but you know, you don't have to fit into such a square peg, right? Or a round hole or whatever.
Yeah.
You can look at yourself and say, okay, so I'm not going to be an oncologist, but I know clinical operations really well. Maybe I know data really well. Maybe I'm business savvy. And there's a pathway that brings together those kind of key areas that you focus on, right? And so over time, I think you can figure out like what that path is. And hopefully it's a combination of things that you're good at and that you love, and that there's also a little bit of a need for. So I have people reach out to me all the time, like looking for, especially these days, looking for a job, looking for a role, keep your eyes open for me. And I usually say, go out there and find like a handful of job descriptions that you read and you just love,
Hmm.
right? Even if you're not qualified, even if they
Yeah.
want somebody in Ukraine, even if they need somebody who has an MD, PhD, and 30 years experience, don't pay any attention to the qualifications. Try to
Yeah.
find like what really gets you excited. Not that you're going to be able to immediately get that job, but try to use that as a little bit of like a guide of like, because you don't have to take a specific path. Like finding maybe what you want to work towards, I think can be really helpful at
Mhm.
times to, because as we were saying, there's not a clear pathway here in our industry, and there's a lot of different ways you can come into it and a lot of different ways you can go. So I think sometimes it can be confusing of like, what's my next step? Um,
Correct.
is that just going from associate director to director level? You could certainly do that, but if you zoom out and you look at all the things out there, occasionally I think it's important to like see what really gets you kind of excited.
No, that's great. That's great. Just looking at the clock right now, we're 40 minutes in. Perfect.
Yeah.
But Scott, I want to thank you so much. I think before we go, I just wanted to get your understanding of how do you define success?
How do I define it?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess for me, I don't have a canned sort of quote to give you necessarily that like guides me day to day or something, but I feel like I have, personally, I have, I think high standards for myself and those around me. Um, I think I'm somebody who naturally likes to explore and grow, tackle new challenges, figure out a solution when someone says no, it can't be done. So I think I feel successful when I feel like I've achieved things or, you know, figured out something that was hard or maybe battled through some tough phases, a little bit of delayed gratification. I think
Right.
at the end of the day, success is personal. For me, it's kind of like feeling good about what I did, feeling like I kind of gave it my all and I did everything I could do. Um, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Maybe you don't always get the outcome, but I think success can be like, you know, feeling good about what you kind of the effort you put
Hmm.
in. And so that, yeah, it's not certainly not about a job title or a level or a salary or something. I think each day is kind of a new day, and I try to be successful each day and try to strive to be a little bit better than yesterday. Also, for those of us who are like mentors or supervisors or even parents too, we're always, whether we like it or not, we're also often serving as an example for others. And so I feel
Right.
like
So
it's important to kind of be modeling and showing what we can do. And so I try to kind of keep that in mind too. But yeah, I don't
that's
know. Do
great
you have
advice.
any last words of wisdom for us on like how you view
No, I
success?
just look at success is small strides every day. If you can meet your goals for the day, for the week, for the month, or for the year, that's your success. And
Hmm.
nobody cares for your success. You have to enjoy and cherish your success.
True.
Uh, yeah, so it's an individual thing, right? And I think people should enjoy successes. Everybody achieves something in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year. Sometimes we just look at what's been projected out there on LinkedIn or social media, and we get fascinated and start, I would say, discounting ourselves on what we have done. So I think every day has challenges. Every day you build successes.
You gotta celebrate these things. I have a high schooler who has his last final exam in about an hour. He should celebrate when he's done and takes a break for
Yeah,
the summer.
absolutely.
I've got a daughter in college who applied for something that was a huge stretch. It was a little bit of a
Yeah.
game changer, really out there. She heard back today she didn't get it. Kind of devastating, but she'll bounce back. And because when something like that happens, other doors open as well,
Doors
and you kind
open.
of learn
Yeah.
from it and how do you handle adversity. So I think even for me today, using the parenting analogy, I've got one guy who's going to finish a test. It'll probably go well. He's going to celebrate summer starts. On the other side, I've got somebody who just took kind of a big hit and is going to have to like bounce back and be resilient. So it's there all the time. You got to like hang in there.
You got to wear different hats today. One with the boy who's finishing or getting to his summer, and the girl with the little bit of disappointment. That's gonna
Yep.
propel her further. I feel like that's gonna be like a good foundation stone for her to like just take the trajectory up. But Scott, again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I know we have
Oh,
rescheduled this so many times, but yeah, this is going to
oh,
be, I think, a great opportunity for people listening in to learn more about how to deal with challenges and how to
yeah.
slowly build foundation.
I love you're putting this out there as a little bit of a, I don't know, a support piece. I guess I would just add, because you can probably see my name down here. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. If anybody, I certainly don't have all the answers by any stretch, but if I can support you, if I can offer any kind of input, feel free to reach out to me and
Yeah,
connect with me. And I'd love to be able to support everyone's growth around
absolutely.
us.
And I will be putting in a description and a LinkedIn link as well in the description of the video, so people will have access to you if they wanted to reach out to you, Scott.
Perfect. Sounds
Great.
great. Well, thanks
Thank
again
you
for
so much
having
for
me.
your
I enjoyed it.
Thank you.